wonderful news, Mrs. Appleyard.
Don't be so foolish, woman. If all of them had been found, but only one, this makes it worse. Far worse. This tragedy is little more than a week old, and already three, mark you, sets of parents have written advising me that their daughters will not be here next term. Now, the newspapers have something further to sensationalize about. Newspapers all over the world have headlined our morbid affair, Miss Lumley. I mean, you realize that, I suppose. The 3 who have been withdrawn, plus the 3 still missing on the rock.
2, Mrs. Appleyard. Only 2 now. I'm quite sure Irma will be coming back.
That makes 6, Miss Lumley. Who will not be with us next term. In addition, there are several sets of tuition fees impossibly overdue. Sarah Wayborn, for instance.
Most inconsiderate, if I may say so, Mrs. Appleyard.
Yes. Well, I expect we shall see our way through somehow.
Good evening, one and all. This is the movie program on Public Radio KCBX, Take 2. A scene from Peter Weir's Picnic at Hanging Rock opens up our program tonight, as we will be discussing the great Australian and now perhaps Americanized director Peter Weir tonight on the program. And across the aisle from me, hiding his Australian accent as best he can, it's my mate, Bob Whiteford.
And across the aisle from me, looking as stalwart and powerful as Ayers Rock himself, Burke and Willis personified gentleman Jim Dee. Jimmy?
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
And here we are, talking about dedicating this show to the great Australian filmmaker Peter Weir. Folks out there asked for it, and they've got it.
Yeah, we have one announcement to make, but we'll also tell you how the show came together, which was somewhat miraculous even today when we were doing research on the show. We do want to mention that the 19th Annual Santa Barbara International Film Festival will be happening January 30th through February the 8th, 2004, is looking for student films. And if you are a student attending any school in Santa Barbara, your game to submit your work and see it or have it seen at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. You can put those entries in and perhaps you will be chosen. Here's a couple of numbers for you to jot down. If you are a student interested in submitting a film to the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, it's area code 805-966-0190. The fax number, 805-966-6650. We'll be letting you know about this. The deadline is December the 12th. And we'll remind you of this opportunity to get your films out there at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, which is forthcoming in January in subsequent shows. Well, the subject of our show tonight, director Peter Weir, we did have a listener write to us and say, why not a show about Peter Weir? We've been thinking about it since then because we got the request maybe about a month or two ago. We'd also like to mention that you can write to us at movies@kcbx.org if you want to make a comment, suggest a program subject. Write to us, movies@kcbx.org. So we got the request. As we were doing the research for the show tonight, we wondered, hey, what's Peter Weir up to now? I mean, he hasn't really made a film since The Truman Show, which goes back to 1998, and lo and behold, his newest film comes out within the next 2 weeks or so. It's the new Russell Crowe film, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World.
Now, anybody who spent any time in front of the TV watching baseball playoffs and World Series has seen this trailer probably about 5,000 times. But at no time did I realize this was a Peter Weir film.
Me neither.
And, well, It's what, coming out Friday, Jimmy?
Yeah,
Or very shortly.
Kind of a cosmic convergence. And again, thanks to the listener who wanted to do this show. And here is Peter Weir from quite humble beginnings in Australia. The late 70s, early 80s was kind of a renaissance for Australian film. A number of great directors were making films that were recognized around the world, including, for instance, Bruce Beresford with Breaker Morant.
Gillian Armstrong.
Yes.
Holy smokes. I mean, yeah, if we go back, maybe like 24 years ago, I think a film called Don's Party in 1975, I can't remember who directed that right now.
Bruce Beresford.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay. a breakthrough film.
And boy, I think of Don's Party, just the language in it is very creative swearing in that.
Absolutely.
It had me in
it's the
stitches.
way I want to spend election night every night.
Oh, Don's Party. Not a Peter Weir film, but highly recommended.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden, in the mid to late 70s, we over here on the other side of the Pacific became aware of this really interesting film movement going on in Australia. Yeah, Breaker Morant, I mean, there's a great film.
Yes.
And right at the vanguard of the movement is Peter Weir.
Just a few other ones that are just coming to mind. The Man from Snowy River.
Oh, holy smokes.
Not a Peter Weir film. Australia was embracing almost Disney-like qualities, like The Man from Snowy River almost could be a Disney film, but the production values and the cinematography was so stunning. For those of you who just enjoyed Seabiscuit, if you can seek out an Australian film called Farlap, it's right up there. It's a fabulous film. But this was made in that Renaissance period of Australia making its mark in global cinema, late 70s, early 80s. And that's when Peter Weir started his first film to really hit over here, I guess, was made in 1974, called The Cars That Ate Paris. And, Bob, I haven't seen this film.
I've seen bits and pieces of it myself. This film has been very hard to come across in the States. In fact, I think it just came out on DVD recently. A real offbeat, peculiar film. The Aussies, you got to give them credit. They've got a very quirky sense of humor. And this film is a real oddity. I'm kind of dancing around the plot because I don't really know what it is. I just know that it's kind of a peculiar film, and it's very interesting.
And right after The Cars That Ate Paris in 1974, Peter Weir did make a mark with Picnic at Hanging Rock in 1975, and that's what we open up our program tonight with. And a very atmospheric and interesting film about based on a true story of some group of schoolgirls who were lost in the wilderness or outback of Australia, and it's how the population reacts to their disappearance. I won't give away what happens near the end, but
this is a fascinating film. I mean, just to break it up on several levels. One, it's visually quite stunning to look at.
Yes,
it's beautiful. I mean, it's like a painted canvas, and the way he captures the subtleties of 1900 Australia with a very heavy British colonial overtone to it, very Victorian and almost Gothic. And you don't think of Australia having a Gothic, almost supernatural tale or being a background for a Gothic supernatural tale. Of course, you think of England or something like that. But no, this is a really terrific and very, very, I don't know how to quite describe this film. It's very unusual. Rachel Roberts, who is was in the opening clip, playing the headmistress, who's struggling to come to grips with the disappearance of these girls. And like you said, Jim, it isn't just about the girls' disappearance. It's about the people inability to comprehend what's happened. And Weir throws in a little bit of Aborigine mysticism and whatnot, which just takes the film to even more interesting depths. This is a very deep, very textured, psychologically compelling film.
And I think he took some big chances in Picnic at Hanging Rock, in the fact that we won't talk about the resolution, but let's just say the resolution of this movie is daring. And what Peter Weir has done, in fact, when I was just looking at a number of his films today to get our clips, Bob, I found that recurring theme of people who are in places that are out of place. Also the clash of cultures and the meshing of cultures. I think Peter Weir is... he loves diversity. He loves that mixture of different types of people, types of cultures. The clashes that are inherent in those, mixtures. But then I think he probably just loves that diversity. He celebrates diversity in all of his films.
And, the bumping of the heads as the cultures come together. And where does it go from there? With some of the other films we'll be talking about, some characters it's like they kind of don't get it from the onset and they're kind of out of the picture. But other characters go deeper into these cultural differences and they start exploring it, and that's where it gets fascinating.
Right after Peter Weir made Picnic at Hanging Rock in 1975, he was involved in an Australian TV series in 1976 called Luke's Kingdom. I don't know anything about that, but just for the record, he did do some TV work. But then in 1977, he made the first film that I saw by Peter Weir and truly knocked my socks off. It's still a great film capturing an atmosphere, a mood, and an ultimate culture clash, The Last Wave, with Richard Chamberlain, and a fascinating premise of the fact that Richard Chamberlain is a lawyer. He deals with law, and then he's given a case of Aborigines who have... Well, there's a murder that takes place amongst the community in Sydney, I believe it is. And the laws that govern the Aborigines and the laws that govern the Australians, the whites, are totally different. We're talking about two different worlds, and they come together in this film. If you read the Carlos Castaneda books or something like that, you're talking about this mysticism. We're talking about people entering other people's dreams. It works, and it looks like it was made on a very low budget. It's that creative thread that Peter Weir sent through the film.
Jim, it's almost like he picks up right where he leaves off with Picnic at Hanging Rock. Again, this kind of mystical, and like you say, they're two different cultures. The Anglo culture, Richard Chamberlain, a man of, law, written law and cultural law, and here come the Aborigines, and their laws are more to do with nature and things that are not easily explainable, yet they're ancient.
Yes.
And he's kind of beguiled as he enters this case, I think, to defend these fellows, or I believe he's defending them, and suddenly he's on a journey he never dreamt of.
Well, he's very interested in the Aborigines and their tribal laws, and what is fascinating on this film is as it progresses, he finds out that the Aborigines are very interested in him, which propels the movie along further. Here's a scene from The Last Wave to set this up. It is Richard Chamberlain in his home, and there are two Aborigines who are talking about the case. One of the Aborigines, who is played by David Gopalil, who you might have seen in the film Walkabout, more recently in the film, I'll think of the title after the clip. But here's Richard Chamberlain, the lawyer, talking to the two Aborigines and talking about dream time.
Why did Billy die?
He saw things, took things,
The thing he shouldn't touch.
What sort of things?
Just the things?
Could I see them?
No.
Why not?
Then you must die too. Yemar kamera. Menurun kamera, aku yang ber kamera. Nah. He wants to know about you seeing me.
I was in my study, asleep. I woke up and you were in the next room across the hall, standing, holding a stone.
What was on stone?
A carving, a kind of face. There was blood on one corner of the stone. What did I see?
A dream.
What are dreams?
Dreamlike. Seeing, hearing, talking. The way of knowing things.
Like what?
Like if my family's in trouble, from dream, they send me messages.
In dreams?
And through my body. Part of my body will move. If my brother called me. I'll show you a dream.
Now, Bob, it's important to note that the first time that Richard Chamberlain saw David Gulpilil was in his dream. And it's later when he's going to defend the group of Aborigines who are accused of killing one of the members of their group. He sees him, and for the first time in, shall we say, reality time, and he's shocked that he first saw him in a dream. And Peter Weir handles this so well in the fact that it's very moody, but I didn't find it hokey at all. I mean, there's films that get into dreams and mysticism, and he handles it so well in this film. I was riveted the entire time.
Again, subtle.
Yes.
Subtle, like Picnic at Hanging Rock. He doesn't beat you up with like a bunch of like pyrotechnics. I don't know. I've been slamming on that a lot lately. But, I mean, it's just subtle. And the supernatural aspects to this film are subtle.
Yes.
Which makes them all the more believable.
And you think of the title, The Last Wave, there's this constant showing of water. Richard Chamberlain's kids let the bathtub overflow upstairs in their house, and here's water coming down the stairs, which you're shocked at first, but it's just the tub sort of overflowing. And then there are rains, and there's raining frogs in this film as well. But it's done in such a way. It'd be interesting to find the budget on The Last Wave. There's no computer-generated special effects. This is way before computer effects were even happening. But it's the mood that's created, and there's a final scene in this film that's kind of riveting, and then it goes to the end credits. It's a great film, The Last Wave, from 1977
or 77,
from director Peter Weir, and also putting Australia on the map. Should mention too that we're going to be talking about Gallipoli and the year of living dangerously next, but what also made an impact on the world, it didn't really happen here, was Mel Gibson in the Mad Max films. Mad Max came out late 70s or so. Really was a huge worldwide hit, but not in this country. And there was Australia making its filmmaking known, not in this country, because both Mad Max and Road Warrior weren't as huge here in this country as they were around the world.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think in part because when they first were released with the original Australian dialects, they were impossible for Americans to figure out what they were saying. I know we've talked about this in terms of certain British films, that the dialogue and the colloquialisms are such that you can't understand what they're saying. It's English, but I found, like with Mad Max, I think what happened was it actually enjoyed success here on cable television. Cinemax kind of brought, but that's, we're talking like 5 years after it probably came out.
Yes.
Suddenly it became kind of a cult favorite through cable television. And in fact, a lot of these Australian films seem to enjoy that. That was a good venue for them to kind of break through.
Yeah. I want to make clear that the Road Warrior films, Mad Max and Road Warrior, were not Peter Weir films, but they were there in this renaissance of Australian filmmaking with Peter Weir right there in the forefront with his films. And let's move on. I mean, the next film, and which I think is a classic film, I think it will be looked at for years to come as just a great adventure film, a great statement about war, is Peter Weir's 1981 film called Gallipoli.
And this film, the historical pretext to this film was the ill-fated British landings in Turkey in the Gallipoli Peninsula in 1915. And part of the landings were carried out by British soldiers. The other part was carried out by what was called Anzacs, or Australian, New Zealand, Army Corps, British colonial troops. And this particular campaign was a monumental disaster of proportions that were quite epic. In fact, Winston Churchill had planned this operation as a younger, I believe, Minister of the Navy Department in Britain at the time, and it practically destroyed his career. This particular battle or campaign, I think they landed on two sides of the peninsula back in 1915. They didn't have modern landing craft or anything. They had like rowboat or like big wooden boats, whale boats practically. And the Turkish army proved to be quite formidable fighting on their home ground. And this was a preemptive assault. At that time, Turkey was neutral. And the British decided to attack them anyway for strategic reasons. Gallipoli defended the Dardanelles Straits. That being said, and the Dardanelles Straits connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, so it's a very intense strategic importance. That being said, Peter Weir has created one of the great war, anti-war, adventure, tragedies. One of the great, it's like a tragedy on par with All Quiet on the Western Front, G.W. Papp's excellent West Front 1918, King Vidor's The Big Parade, Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory. This film, and let's face it, World War I, Jim, is a perfect canvas to paint a war is an absurd tragedy tale, and Peter Weir scores huge with this film.
We have a great clip for you, but before we hear from the man himself, because we have Peter Weir talking about his inspiration for Gallipoli, here again, it's two young guys, Mel Gibson and Mark Lee, coming from sort of a naive, adventurous, patriotic Australia, and they're going to Turkey. And here we again, the clash of cultures. On the way to Turkey, they go through Cairo, they're looking at the pyramids, they're looking at the Sphinx, and then here are the displaced Australians in this far-off land. And the recurring theme in Peter Weir's work is the fish out of water, the culture clash. Here is Peter Weir himself talking about Gallipoli. He is reading from the history book of Australia's entry into World War I and the inspiration that he got for Gallipoli.
The 10th went forward to meet death instantly, as the 8th had done, the men running as swiftly and as straight as they could at the Turkish rifles. With that regiment went the flower of the youth of Western Australia, sons of the old pioneering families, youngsters, in some cases 2 and 3 from the same home. Men known and popular, the best-loved leaders in sport and work in the West, then rushed straight to their death. Gresley Harper and Wilfred, his younger brother, the latter of whom was last seen running forward like a schoolboy in a foot race with all the speed he could compass. That's from the official history of Australia in the First War. And that particular description of the attack at the neck and those young men, the one, particularly the boy, ran and disappeared, running as if at a foot race, became the breakthrough for the screenplay. Up to that time, David Williamson and I had experimented. We'd been working probably for a year and a half and not getting anywhere. Historical subject can be so, uninteresting for cinema at times. And here we had it in this official history. And we decided to make our central characters runners.
Come on, boy, loosen them up. That's it. Now on the spot. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. What are your legs?
Springs. Steel springs.
What are they going to do?
Hurl me down the track.
How fast can you run?
As fast as a leopard.
How fast are you going to run?
As fast as a leopard.
Then let's see you do it.
The area is still a military zone, and therefore there's been no farming and no building. Trenches have fallen in, but they're all there, or the whole battlefield is there. It's a remarkable experience to visit it, because the ground is littered with shell casings and with live rounds of ammunition, in fact. And it's extraordinary experience to walk through it. There are very few people there. It's a remote spot. And I was the only person there that the 2 or 3 days I wandered about. The book in hand, following the battlefield and the various actions which were all over the place. I swam in Anzac Cove. Beautiful day, and I went underwater, and I'm sure later that stayed in my mind, and I put that underwater scene in where the shrapnel comes down, because it was so beautiful, so peaceful. And I thought, imagine swimming here while death was in the air and your friends were fighting up on the hills. Souvenirs everywhere that the soldiers had dropped, can openers. I remember a boot that the sun had shrunk down to the size of a child's shoe, and this Eno's fruit salt bottle that I picked up. And so I put it in the movie, in a little scene. So you see a shot of Mel Gibson looking at the parcel from home, and he says, "My God, someone even sent me an Eno's fruit salts." But to think of Mel then and Mel now is very difficult, because he was a lad. He was a boy, and full of beans, and really with no sort of grand career ambitions. Otherwise, of course, he wouldn't have been the same man. He was just a working actor, but a pleasure to work with, and the camera loved him.
We haven't gotten into this subject, Bob, yet, but we will talk about it on the show, and the fact that Peter Weir, instrumental in making big stars out of great actors. Mel Gibson was known to the world from the Mad Max films, I should say, and in Gallipoli, he uses him in a very great way, in the fact that he's more than Mad Max. I love the Mad Max films, of course, but he is fabulous in Gallipoli. And the next film he made, The Year of Living Dangerously, further, Peter Weir worked with this actor, turning him into a world-renowned, superb actor that he became. Of course, now he's a little bit pigeonholed in, the action films, Lethal Weapon and that sort of thing. But it was the director's hand and eye that turned Mel Gibson into a world-renowned actor, I believe.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jim. I mean, Mel Gibson, Gallipoli and Year of Living Dangerously are the films that really established him as an international superstar. This guy could act.
Yes.
And up until that time, he was very handsome individual. Mad Max, I mean, entertaining movie, but does the guy act? I mean, he can kill and all this other stuff, but can he act? Peter Weir, under the tutelage of Peter Weir, we've discovered that yes, in fact, he can. In fact, he's not only an actor, he's a leading man.
Yes.
He can carry a film, and he does an outstanding job. in Gallipoli. He's surrounded by great actors. There's Mark Lee, who plays the other young fellow, his friend. There's Bill Hunter. He's in a lot of Australian movies playing the colonel. I mean, you know, during the break, Jim and I were talking about the scene earlier in the film when Mark Lee and Mel Gibson are going to Perth to sign up to fight in the war, and they're in the desert, and they come across this old hermit miner, I don't know what you'd call him, an old desert rat. And,
Yeah.
you know, he has no idea what's going on, which I think is beautiful. And, you know, Peter Weir, genius. And, you know, he's saying, why are you going to join the army? Well, we're at war. Who are we at war with? Well, Germany. Well, why are we fighting them?
He says, I knew a German once, I guess, you know?
Yeah, he's totally oblivious to why this is even happening. And I think Mark Lee says to him, well, we're fighting them so they don't come here. And he looks around the great expanses of the Western Australian desert and says, they can bloody well have it.
Yeah, they're welcome to it. Yeah, and they are just filled with vinegar to, you know, represent Australia, to go to a foreign land, just the whole exotic adventure of it, of these two young guys, two really great buddies going off to war to represent Australia, and of course the tragedy that ensues. It's as Peter Weir, I believe, mentioned in that clip, it's the Australian loss of innocence in the world. And you know, folks, even with what's going on in the world today, Gallipoli is a must-see. It's very timely. It's with what's going on now in Iraq. Check out Gallipoli. It's just a great, great film, and it'll have you talking afterwards.
In fact, John Huston, the late, great John Huston, mentioned that he thought Gallipoli was one of the best films he had ever seen.
The ultimate seal of approval. Boy,
Yep.
Bob, if I made a film, I never will, more than likely. But if John Huston liked it, man, I'll tell you that's
Jim, that is without a doubt one of the greatest films I've ever seen.
I would be, you know, in heaven.
Yeah, it's better than an Academy Award because it means that the film Gallipoli is about 22 years old now. It hasn't aged a day.
It's a great film.
The film is timeless.
Kudos to Peter Weir. And that's who we're talking about tonight on Take Two, the movie program on public radio, KCBX San Luis Obispo, KSBX Santa Barbara. Time for Bob and me to go over to the concession stand, refill our popcorn, our drinks, and more on Peter Weir in just a moment.
I wanna go to the movie show, me and my baby. Come on, let's go. On to the movie show. Let's go. I buy the popcorn as soon as we hit the door. My two brothers Bill and Pons sitting in the front row. They bought the candy. We don't need nothing more. I love a movie show, I tell you, in black and white. I don't care what it is. I don't care how small the theater is. I don't care who's playing. I don't care as long as they got popcorn and candy bars. Butterfly McQueen, she's gone with the wind. I love the film.
We're back on the movie program, Take Two. Tonight we're talking about Australian director Peter Weir, his new film starring Russell Crowe called Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, comes out within the week or within the next 2 weeks or so. And we're talking about his illustrious career going back to the 70s and from humble beginnings. Now, you know, boy, major director, even though it wasn't until today that we realized that Peter Weir's new film was the Russell Crowe film.
And you know, that brings us, we talked about Gallipoli, and this brings us to his next great film, which is 1982's Year of Living Dangerously.
Again, with Mel Gibson. This was a year after he made Gallipoli, also with Sigourney Weaver. I don't know if Alien had been made yet. Had it been?
Yes, it had.
Okay, so this is Sigourney Weaver after Alien. A great role for her as well. Because,
Absolutely.
I mean, Alien, despite it being a renowned horror film, space film, science fiction, she's great in it, but more of a one-note performance. I shouldn't say that, but she's good in Alien.
This was kind of a breakout for her, kind of like Gallipoli, and Year of Living Dangerously broke Mel Gibson out of the Mad Max mold. This breaks her out of the Alien franchise, and we can see she can act. And there's real chemistry between them in this film that helps carry it. I mean, there's something going on between those two in this flick.
And the, shall we say, courageous, if not chance-taking casting selection of Linda Hunt playing a male.
Billy Kwan.
Billy Kwan as the
Indonesian of Chinese descent, kind of a, what would you call the character? Again, almost somewhat supernatural in a way, metaphysical. Billy Kwan kind of works with the journalists, the foreign journalists, a lot of American journalists. Michael Murphy, you might remember him from quite a few Woody Allen movies, The Front in particular, and Manhattan. He plays an American journalist who's not a very nice guy and doesn't really comprehend what is going on in Indonesia. And I might make a footnote here that this is a historical film as well as Gallipoli. The time frame for A Year of Living Dangerously is 1965. It's the end of the Sukarno dictatorship in Indonesia, and it's also paralleling America's involvement in Vietnam. It's early 1965. There's a revolt in Indonesia. Sukarno kind of played the military, and he played off against the communists. He kind of he sat on the fence, so to speak. I mean, I'm speaking probably, I'm not going into the detail necessary, but we don't have like 2 hours to discuss the intricate political situation in Indonesia in 1965. But it was very interesting and very difficult situation because he was also playing the East, which was the Soviet Union and Red China, off against the West, which was the U.S. and Australia. And he's really dancing on a tightrope here. And the film takes place in Jakarta as his regime begins to crumble. That's the backdrop to the film. And you have a lot of anti-Western sentiment. You have a lot of intrigue, of which Billy Kwan, he knows how to work his way, like Sukarno, who's his mentor and idol. Billy Kwan also knows how to work the Western. He knows how to work the Western journalists, and he knows how to get inside the even most secret cells of the Indonesian Communist Party. And of course, all the other journalists treat him with utter contempt.
And here's Mel Gibson from Sydney, Australia, who doesn't want to go back there. He wants to find the hot, cutting-edge story, but he's a stranger in a strange land once again. He does not want to go back to Sydney. He's found Billy and trying to get some connections to get the story to stay there and really be a part of, just be a great reporter. Here's Mel Gibson and Linda Hunt as Billy Kwan in The Year of Living Dangerously.
What do you mean creeping around out there like that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Come in. I keep my sound equipment here. Paula gave me a key. Do you want it back?
Keep it.
Did you get an interview today?
What?
Did you get an interview?
No, I didn't.
You're in trouble, do you realize that?
It's early days yet.
All the top doors are shut to Western journalists.
Curtis got an interview.
Curtis and Wally have got reputations that can't be ignored. Your only way in is personal contacts. Potter sabotaged you.
What do you want me to do, shoot myself? Years I've waited for this. And if I mess it up, they'll send me back to the newsroom in Sydney, and that's a bloody graveyard.
If you could get any interview you wanted, excluding one with Sukarno, who would it be?
Leader of the Communist Party.
I did. I'd get you to him tomorrow.
He doesn't give interviews.
He does when he needs to. He's a friend of mine. I've already spoken to him about you.
How come you're on speaking terms with the head of the
If you
big guy?
want it, it's yours. It should make quite a stir internationally.
If you can get me to hide it, I'll give you all the film work you can handle. Exclusive.
That's great, old man. It's what I've always wanted, a real partnership.
Why the break to me? Why not Potter?
I didn't like him.
Mel Gibson and Linda Hunt in The Year of Living Dangerously, and there's that bond being made, and they become friends. And but to get into the thick of that political intrigue, there is what makes this film compelling. And you mentioned it during the clip too. We're talking about Peter Weir's use of music. He can use classical music all the way up to synthesizer music, but it all seems to work to create the moods that he wants to achieve in his films.
And this film, gosh, Jim, it's like Gallipoli and Year of Living Dangerously are two of my favorite films I've ever seen, and to do them back to back, because Year of Living Dangerously, it deals with the Cold War, one of my favorite subjects, because you're dealing in shades of gray, and that always makes for an interesting movie. It's not a black and white universe these people live in. They live in kind of a gray twilight, trying to find, and it's the story of a journalist trying to find the truth in a situation where the truth is perverted so much as to almost be non-existent. And this film, the relationship between Billy Kwan and Mel Gibson and Sigourney Weaver, who I believe is a British spy masquerading as a diplomat, this is just one of the great Cold War films. And it's very topical in terms of what was happening in Southeast Asia in the mid-'60s. An excellent film, and beautifully photographed, I might add.
Yes.
I believe originally they started filming in Indonesia, but the hostility was so intense that he had to get out of there, and I think they finished the film in the Philippines.
Wow. Well, we've got to move on with Peter Weir because we got some more ground to cover. And the next two films, again, under the tutelage of director Peter Weir, another star became an international superstar, I believe, through the great directing of Peter Weir, and that was Harrison Ford. The next film that Peter Weir made after Year of Living Dangerously was Witness. That was 1985. I know a lot of our listeners have probably seen that film. It gets shown on television a lot, and the culture clash of a murder taking place and a contemporary cop amongst the Amish, and gets shown on television a lot. It's a great film, and catapulting Harrison Ford into stardom. I mean, this wasn't too long after Star Wars, and Harrison Ford is Han Solo. Well, that's one character, but he really stretches in Witness, and then the old 1-2 punch that Peter Weir did with Harrison Ford. The next film in 1986 starred Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren in The Mosquito Coast. Now, this is a film that I kind of remember seeing and didn't really connect with it, but then today when I was looking at it, I have to revisit this film because it seemed quite compelling. Harrison Ford, not a real likable character. He just wants to be separated from the trappings of society and commercialism and so on and so forth with his family. Here's a scene from the Mosquito Coast with Harrison Ford, who is trying to make a home for himself in the wilderness, and he's confronted by Andre Gregory, who is the Andre in My Dinner with Andre, who wants to talk spirituality and God with him. Harrison Ford doesn't want any part of it. This from the Mosquito Coast.
Well done, Jimmy.
State your business, Reverend.
It's the Lord's business I'm about, Mr. Fox.
Oh, is that so? I didn't know the Lord was franchising in the neighborhood.
The Reverend looks a little hot. Perhaps some cold tea, Allie?
Mother?
The Lord sent me here, Mr. Fox.
That's what I love about you people, your complete lack of presumption. The Lord hasn't any idea this place exists. If he did, he would have done something for these people a long time ago, but he didn't. I did.
Allie.
This river doesn't belong to you, brother.
Nor to you. But this place belongs to me, and I didn't give you permission to come ashore.
This man cannot speak for you, good folk. The Lord is your father.
I'm a fair man. If any of you want to go listen to this man across the Geronimo state line, I won't stop you. Any takers?
Check out The Mosquito Coast, directed by Peter Weir. You can see Harrison Ford at his most angry.
You know what's interesting about this, Jim? Could almost draw a parallel between Witness and Mosquito Coast and Gallipoli and Year of Living Dangerously, in the sense that here we had Mel Gibson breaking out of the Mad Max, typecasting. And in the latter two films, you have Harrison Ford breaking out of the Star Wars, Indiana Jones kind of hero role to do something a little more. He's sinking his teeth into something a little different, and we're seeing that this guy is not just a leading man in kind of pleasant, adventure films or light adventure films. He can act.
Yes.
And the sparks between him and Kelly McGillis in Witness, very similar to the sparks between Mel Gibson and Sigourney Weaver in Year of Living Dangerously.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting parallel.
And well said, Bob. Very well said.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Let's move on. Here's another star who I believe gained more credibility under the direction of Peter Weir, and that's Robin Williams, right after The Mosquito Coast. It was 1989 that Peter Weir directed Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society.
Why do I stand up here? Anybody?
To feel taller.
No. Thank you for playing, Mr. Dalton. I stand upon my desk to remind myself that we must constantly look at things in a different way. See, the world looks very different from up here. You don't believe me? Come see for yourselves. Come on. Come on. Just when you think you know something, you have to look at it in another way. Even though it may seem silly or wrong, you must try. Now, when you read, don't just consider what the author thinks. Consider what you think. Boys, you must strive to find your own voice. Because the longer you wait to begin, the less likely you are to find it at all. Thoreau said most men lead lives of quiet desperation. Don't be resigned to that. Break out. Now don't just walk off the edge like lemmings. Look around you. There you go, Mr. Christie. Thank you. Yes. Dare to strike out and find new ground. Now, in addition to your essays, I would like you to compose a poem of your own, an original work. That's right. You have to deliver it aloud in front of the class on Monday. Bonne chance, gentlemen.
That's Robin Williams and Peter Weir's Dead Poets Society, again expanding the range early on for Robin Williams and making him into a much more serious actor. I think Peter Weir did a great job with both Robin Williams and later on in The Truman Show with, respectively, Robin Williams and Jim Carrey. There was that comic sensibility he hung on to that, but he also kind of kept them at bay and used the comedic elements, but also found that more serious side in both actors.
And what's interesting about Dead Poets Society, Jim, is, again, it's a person out of place. Here's Robin Williams, a progressive, kind of intuitive and risk-taking teacher in a very conservative school where he's just running afoul of the powers that be constantly.
And in that clip, I think Robin Williams did the Peter Weir credo. You want to look at things differently. Even when you think you know something, you want to look at it differently. The next film that Peter Weir directed is probably my least favorite, admittedly. It is, despite the fact of the presence of the great French actor Gérard Depardieu and Andie MacDowell. Green Card from 1990 was, I think, an attempt at Peter Weir just to make a nice, light, romantic comedy. And, Gérard is very charming in this film. But it's, for me, of all of Peter Weir's work, it is probably the least demanding, I would say.
Not an unpleasant film to watch. I just thought, my goodness, anybody could have done this. It just didn't seem like, I don't know, it just didn't, I guess because maybe I'm a snob or something. It just didn't
No, you're not.
appeal. I enjoyed watching the film, but afterwards I just thought, gosh, why would Peter Weir do this? Maybe just to see if he could do a light romantic comedy.
I would recommend it, as you said, as a light romantic comedy. But for me, as we're talking about some of his other work, I would say that it just doesn't have the oomph that
it
the other
doesn't.
films.
I mean, you think about some of these other films we've talked about. There's something there you can sink your teeth into. This was a pleasant experience, but it just seemed a sugar buzz. It kind of burns off, and then that's it.
However, Peter Weir did redeem himself, at least in my view, with his next film. We don't have any clips from Fearless from 1993. Now, this is an absolutely great film. Jeff Bridges is a survivor of a plane crash, and here we have the stranger in a strange land. He goes into a mindset where his whole life changes. Yes, he did survive this plane crash. Actually, you don't even see the plane crash until the end of the film. But folks, if you haven't seen Fearless with Jeff Bridges, not only is it a great performance by Jeff Bridges, and we need to do a show on him one of these days.
Definitely, or the Bridges clan.
Yes.
Lloyd, Jeff, and Bo Bridges.
Yes. But Fearless, maybe not a film that you would think of right off the bat, but it is poignant. It's moving. There's a point in this film where I find myself crying. It's just the ultimate stranger in a strange land theme of Peter Weir's work, although Jeff Bridges is a stranger to himself and all the people around him as a result of surviving this plane crash. There's a film you'll never see on a flight somewhere. You'll never see it on a plane. But if you're in the comfort of your own home watching this film, it's a poignant, moving, great performance from Jeff Bridges and a great film from Peter Weir. But Peter Weir lately is picking his subjects to make his films carefully. From 1993 with Fearless, it wasn't until 5 years later that he had Jim Carrey star in The Truman Show. That's 1998, and I would say with all these reality TV shows that seem to be on TV a lot now, those producers need to go back and watch The Truman Show because they just need to watch the movie and forget about making these reality shows.
Absolutely. I mean, this movie is far more fascinating than anything you'll see on network television on weeknights with, people eating worms and all this bevy of European beauties being charmed by this phony cowboy. Truman Show, fascinating movie about... subtext of the individual in surveillance culture, which was very big, in the late 90s, pre-9/11. People were talking a lot about privacy and the culture of the surveillance culture, and this film really captures that.
It captures also perhaps why we're fascinated with looking at somebody's life, live 24 hours a day. And also Jim Carrey as this sweet, funny, but truly the ultimate victim of this surveillance. And Ed Harris puts in a great performance in this film. In fact, boy, we're just blasting through this entire hour with Peter Weir. Here is a clip. Actually, it's the opening of The Truman Show.
1.7 billion were there for his birth. 220 countries tuned in for his first step. The world stood still for that stolen kiss. And as he grew, so did the technology. An entire human life recorded on an intricate network of hidden cameras and broadcast live and unedited 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to an audience around the globe. Coming to you now from Sea Haven Island, enclosed in the largest studio ever constructed, and along with the Great Wall of China, one of only 2 man-made structures visible from space. Now, in its 30th great year, it's The Truman Show!
Well, the producers are drooling. A 30-year run on a TV show. Boy, they got the ratings down.
Oh, you bet.
That's Peter Weir's Truman Show with Jim Carrey. And, when I mentioned that was the opening of The Truman Show, that was the opening of the show that's in the movie. I think Peter Weir amazingly puts that introduction well into the movie. It doesn't open up the film. It's later on that you see the actual production of what they're doing with Jim Carrey. Cameras on him from his birth, and he is the TV show that the world has been watching for 30 years.
And, Jim Carrey is interesting in this because, again, we have the comedic, genius of Jim Carrey, if you will. But this is the first film where we really see that he can act.
And I think it took Peter Weir's direction. I mean, he knew how to contain this guy who I'm sure has that comedic explosiveness, but he marshals it really well in this film, I believe.
And Carrey gives off a great performance. Truman Show, an excellent film.
Well, folks, Bob and I have used up this entire hour, but we did want to celebrate the great work of Peter Weir. His new film comes out soon. Russell Crowe in Master and Commander, Far Side of the World. I'd like to see what he does with what seems to be a big budget film. And hopefully you got some insight into his early work. Pick out at the video store, check out Picnic at Hanging Rock or The Last Wave or The Year of Living Dangerously or the clips we had from Gallipoli. That is available on DVD with some nice extras. That's a very, very timely film. And we applaud the work of Peter Weir from the humble beginnings in Australia to being a world-renowned director.
Well, holy smokes, it looks like the hour has just flown by here. But this has just been a gas. Peter Weir, director of 2 of my favorite films, Gallipoli and Year of Living Dangerously. And folks, I agree with Jim. If you get a chance, check out some of these films. You will be amazed.
Our thanks to Hank, the great projectionist, and we sorry that the hour didn't allot your phone calls. We'll do that again next week, and hope you'll join us again next week on Take 2, the movie program.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week.